Today's daf is daf Mem Vav, and we got up to Chutz Min Adam. So let's just review what we saw in the Mishnah back on daf Mem Hey Amid Beis, that although a matir, which is not a nitar, is excluded from pigul and the chiyuv karis for eating pigul, nevertheless, with regard to nosar tome and nosar and tome, we said that there's machlokas between the Tanakama and Reb Shimon, but chutz min adam. So again, in the case of dam, which is only a matir and not a nitar, not only is there no pigul on the dam for karis for achilas adam, but also there's no there's no uh, there's no tuma, which means that if a tome would eat the dam, he's not chayiv karis. And the same thing would apply to nosar, that if the dam was left over for the next day and you ate the dam, there would be no chiv kares. Now, let's just point out that Rashi asks the obvious question here. There's always going to be kares for dam. The Torah tells us that even if you eat dam chulin, nefesh asher tochal sadam v'nichras, so he gets kares. But Rashi points out that if you do it b'shogeg yichai v'chatos, and now the question is, if let's say you ate the dam of a korban, would you be chayiv two chatos if you did it b'shogeg? And the answer is no. You would not be chayiv a second korban, meaning a second chatos, because once the zrika, the dam was done, then there's no longer an iser achilas nosar on the dam, no longer an iser of tuma for eating the dam. Minani mili, how do we know this? Now, back in Masechta Me'ilah on Daf Yud Aleph, the Gemara teaches us that there's no Me'ilah in dam. And the Gemara over there in Me'ilah asks the question, how do we know that there's no Me'ilah in dam? And the Gemara gives three possible answers, three possible derivations. Omar Ula, Omar Krovanina Sati Lachem. Whenever the Torah says Lachem, it indicates private ownership from which you're allowed to benefit, and it's no longer subject to Me'ilah, which is stealing from Hegdesh. Shalachem Yehei, it's yours. To Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, they have a different derivation. Omar Kra Lechaper Lechapar Nesativ Velo Leme'ilah. Let's just see if we can get the pasuk here. Ki nefesh habasar bahemhu v'anina sativ lachem. So that's ula, derives from lachem. And then it says al mizbech lechaper al nafshel sechem. And from the word lechaper, we derive a mute of lekapar nesativ lo me'ilah. And that's going to exclude the dam of a korban from the isur me'ilah. So we have two derivations so far. Now we have a third Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kara, who in the pasuk it says ki adam hu banefesh, and that's a mute. Hu lifnei kapar kiliacher kapar, meaning if a person would be moel in the dam after the zrika, that's lacher kapara, then for sure he would not be chayiv for me'ilah. That's a dover portion. Why? Because that's called naseis mitzvah. So me'ilah is only before you fulfill the mitzvah with the object, in this case the dam. And now the Torah is saying that the status of the dam even before naseis mitzvah, so meaning even before the zrika was done on the dam, is equivalent to and identical to the status of the dam after zrika, after the kapara. Ma achar kapara ein lo me'ila, af lifnei kapara ein lo me'ila. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. I understand Rabbi Yochanan's derivation in the sense that the Torah is indicating with the word hu that le'achar kapara and lifnei kapara to be compared. But how do you know which direction to compare it to? Amo, why not suggest just the opposite direction? Liachar kapar kil lifnei kapar, meaning why don't we go lechumra in this equation and say that liachar kapar, which is already naseis mitzvah, so would be have the same din as lifnei kapar also. Ma lifnei kapar yesh bo meila, obviously, is af liachar kapara yesh bo meila, and this would be an exception to the rule of naseis mitzvaso, because the general rule is that once the mitzvah is done, there's no meila. Now we're saying that even after the zrika, meaning the kapara, there still is a violation of the Isur Da, and that violation is called meila. So Gemara says, "Ein l'cha davar shenas mitzvaso v'umolim b'hem." There's no such thing in the universe of halacha of a case where it was already nasis mitzvaso and there's still an isur meila. Because what does meila mean? Meila means that this is designated for an avoda, for the migdash, and you went ahead and misappropriated. You're chayav mishum meila. But if in this case, the dam was already nizrak, so you've already fulfilled the entire mitzvah, then there's no rhyme or reason to why there should be an Isur Me'ila. But the Gemara says, V'lo, I'm going to prove to you more than once that there is or are precedents for Nasis mitzvahs and there's still Me'ila. Varei Trumas Hadeshin, right? So on a daily basis, they would take the ashes off the Mizbeach and bring it outside the Mikdash, and they would put it in a certain place outside the Mikdash. And the law is that you weren't allowed to enjoy the benefit from these ashes of Trumas Hadeshen, even though it was Nasis Mitzvah. If it was already burnt, then the mitzvah of Hakrava was already fulfilled. And now the Gemara pulls a principle from many sugis and shas and see how it sizes up to apply here, and that's called Shnei Ksuva Bom Kechnei Malamdin. Because in addition to the case of Trumas Hadeshin, where the sacrificial animal parts were already burnt on the mizbeach, so it's already nasis mitzvah, yet nevertheless the ashes are prohibited. There's another case, we'll see a big day kahuna, where even though the mitzvah was fulfilled, nevertheless the Isur still persists. And then we apply the principle that if in two cases, first in Trumas Halishka and second in Big Day Kuna, the Torah has taught us and established that even after Nasis Mitzvah, so Me'ila still persists, then we apply the principle of Shnei Ksuva Bam Kechad. Mishum Davi Trumas Hadesh Big Day Kuna, Shnei Ksuva Bam Kechad, V'yein Kol Shnei Ksuva Bam Kechad, Ein Malamdin. Now let's just quickly go over the laws of Big Day Kahuna. The Kohen Gadol would wear Big Day Lavan, 4 in total, during the Avoda Lifnai V'Lifnim. For example, the Ketores or the Hazoyos of the Damapor Damasoyer. And the Big Day Lavan were 4 begadim that would be added to the Big Day Zav, the golden vestments. And what happens after Yom Kippur? Now, the Kohen Gadol used these vestments and wore them on Yom Kippur, but whatever he had to do while he was wearing them was done already. So it's Motzi Yom Kippur, it's Nasis Mitzvah. So, and yet the Torah says, Ve'inicham Sham. The Kohen Gadol cannot reuse his Big Day Lavan from one year to the next, and therefore he has to, so to speak, bury it there so that nobody gets any benefit from it. So from V'inicham Sham, we're going to learn that there still would be Me'ila even after Yom Kippur on the Big Day Lavan. And therefore, we have Shnei Ksuba Bam Kechad Ein Melamdin. So Gemara says, but not everybody agrees to that principle of Shnei Ksuba Bam Kechad Ein Melamdin. Hanichel Rabbana di Amri. We'll get to that question in just a minute. I jumped the gun. Hanichel Rabbana di Amri Vinicham Sham Alamet Shetunim Kniza. El Rabbi Dosa di Amra Mutaros Hein Lekoin Hedjot. Ubilvad Shelo Yishtamish Behen Liyom HaKippurim Acher. Rabbi Dosa is going to have a different derivation from the Pasuk V'nicham Sham. And that Pasuk V'nicham Sham was the source for which from which we derive the conclusion that there's Me'ila even after the Kohen Gadol finished using these begadim, the Avodas Yom HaKippurim has terminated. And B'nicham Sham means he has to permanently put it in a place where nobody will get to it because there's an Iser of Me'ila. But we reject that. And Rabbi Dosa says, no, that I'm not going to darshan v'nicham sham. I'm going to assume that nasis mitzvaso, and then after Yom Kippur, when the mitzvah was done, mutar same l'kohen hedge, and anybody's allowed to benefit from these big day kahuna, the big day loven that the Kohen Gadol wore when he went lifnai v'lifnim. But the main thing is that we don't reuse these begadim a year down the line. In any event, according to Rabbi Dosa, my equal and Meimer, the Gemara asks, right? If the Torah is teaching me that in Trumas Hadeshen and in Big Day Kahuna that Nasis Mitzvah does not remove the Iser, and the Iser Me'ila goes back into its place. So where's the Shnei Ksuba Bam Kechane Melamd? And the Gemara answers, Mishum Davi Trumas Hadeshen Vegla Rufa, Shnei Ksuba Bam Kechane called Shnei Melamd. So what's the deal with Egla Rufa? When we find a body that was slain equidistant between two cities, then we do a whole ceremony of Egla Rufa. And we're not allowed to benefit from the Egla Rufa after the Arifa is done. Let's see if he tells you which pasuk it is. 1 second, 17. Oh, so in Dvarim Perek Chaf Aleph, we have the parsha of Egla Rufa, and it says V'orfo Sham es ha-Egla. So that teaches us that the Egla Rufa must be buried there in the valley and is prohibited for benefit. So the Gemara says, there is one man the who says that even if the Torah repeats itself a second time around, we could still use it as a binyan av and derive conclusions from other dinim, for other applications, and therefore we see that we don't apply nasis mitzvaso. And the Gemara answers that trei mi'ute ksive, that with regard to the Trumas Hadeshen and with regard to Egla Rufa, we have two different mi'utim. Hachaksiv, with regard to Egla Rufa, it says ha'aruf with the extra he. For Hasam Ksiv, and there in the case of Trumas Hadeshen, it says V'samo. So both these words in the Torah, whether it's ha'arufa or whether it's V'samo, are mi'utim to tell you that the din of Nasis mitzvoso being suspended only applies here in these two cases. Okay, now let's get back to the fact that we had three psukim in order to exclude dam from Me'ilah. Utlasa kroy b'dam lomali. Why do we need three psukim? So the answer is limute mimila, nosar, and tuma. So the Gemara asks about pigul. What about pigul? Don't we need a pasuk to teach us that the dam of the carbon is excluded from pigul? Desnan kol sheyesh bo matirim bein le'adam bein l'zvechai v'lo b'shum pigul v'dam gufei matirhu. So since dam is only a matir and it's not a nitar, therefore there's no pigul in dam. Rabbi Yochanan, Shlosha Krisos B'Shlomim Lomali. The Torah repeats itself three times in teaching us that for Shlomim you will be chayav kares. So let's just quickly go over the psukim. He's got in Vayikra Chav Beis, Emor alehem l'dorosechem kol isha sheyikra mikol zarachem el hakodshim asher yakrivu b'nei Yisrael Hashem v'nekmos olav v'nechus hanefesh hahi milufana ani Hashem. So that's the first pasuk that tells you in Shlomim Yechayev Kares. Then, if we go back to Vayikra Zayin, V'hanefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashlom shel Hashem v'tumasa olav v'nichus hanefesh hahi me'ameha. So that parsha in Vayikra Zayin is talking about a tameh, and it says Hashatochal Bosam Zevach Hashlomim. That means he's tameh and the Shlomim are tahar. If he eats the Shlomim, then he's chayav kares. What's the third? V'nefesh ki siga b'chol tameh b'tumas adam o b'behema o b'behema tmeya o b'chol sheketz tameh v'yochal mibsar zevach hashlom mashel Hashem v'nichrisa nefesh hahi me'ameha. So this is a case of tumas haguf, and there's another pasuk apparently with regard to someone who made contact with something that's tameh. The Torah could have combined all of these in one pasuk and mentioned kares only once.